Warning, this video discusses the reality that all humans, including parents, make mistakes. If you believe that acknowledging parental imperfections is dishonorable, this is not the video for you. Feel free to watch something else.
I was at secondary school in 4th or 5th form. So preparing either for mock A-level exams or for final A-level exams. And I had a lot going on. I never really liked school. I went because I had to go. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was just doing what everyone else was doing, and everyone else was doing sciences because they wanted to become doctors. So because I like animals, I thought that I might become a vet because I had no idea that there were so many other options. I had a lot of anxiety. I did not enjoy going to school because there was a lot of pressure to do well, to win a Barbados scholarship. There was a lot of pressure because of the way in which I was parented. I remember my mother going to a parent-teachers meeting and leaving in a rage because a mathematics teacher had said that I was a class clown. So she couldn't wait to get home, and being just terrified because I didn't like math. I wasn't good at it. I had a horrible foundation at primary school because of, again, the fear of corporal punishment. You were beaten. And so if I didn't understand anything, I would try to get away with not understanding rather than try to clarify because you'd be beaten for not understanding. I was beaten because my father was a public figure and the teachers would say things like, you think that because your father is so-and-so, I'm afraid to beat you. And so they would beat me. And then I couldn't turn to my parents because there was an idea that if you complained to the teachers, then they would ignore the child. And so they'd been through it, and look at them. That's what they would say, but look at them. People who just did not know how to communicate in ways that felt supportive. And so I had a lot of anxiety. I was dealing with my same-sex attraction and feeling loneliness and isolation and being bullied at school. So there were a lot of things happening for which there was no recourse other than this guidance counselor. We were encouraged to see her by other teachers. She was an adult. Adults were the people you respected and trusted. And she was working at a school. So along with being a professional whose job was based on trust, she was an adult who was endorsed by other adults, other teachers, and so she was someone that I felt was a professional who could be trusted. And so I was excited to go see her, and I did that. And I talked a bit about my same-sex attraction, which I think was the big deal, but I talked to her a couple of times, and so I felt that I could trust her with something else. And so I started to tell her the story. I told her the story about how devastated I'd been, how difficult it was to remain focused on school, on preparing for my A-levels, and I knew that she was there for support, not only with future career planning, but emotional support and support with family issues. So I told her the story about how someone was calling the house. And I noticed that my mother's voice would change when she spoke to this person. I noticed that she would make sure that I'd put down the extension before she continued a conversation with this person. And so one day when this person showed up at the house, I said that I was going to my best friend's place, and I left. But instead of going straight there, I came around to the window and I looked in. And when I looked in, I saw my mother kissing this man. I was devastated. I was angry. I was devastated. I threatened him. I was going to throw a big rock into the car's windscreen, and I just ran. And I ran over to my friend's house, and that's where I broke down in tears. I didn't care. I was in tears. I remember under the almond tree in her backyard. And she was trying to comfort me. She didn't know exactly what was going on. I couldn't get the words out because I I was heaving. I was crying. One of those cries that you cry when someone you love has died, and you've collapsed because your legs will not support you. And so I didn't want to go home. I stayed there as long as I could, but then eventually I went back home, and I was called to sit with my mother and asked, how I was feeling, and I couldn't look at her. I remember I could not look at her, and I couldn't really speak. But she wanted to make sure that I was okay, that the story would die there. There was no need for me to tell anyone else about this. And so I was angry at that as well, and I remember I couldn't wait for this to be over. I maybe said, can I go now? And I left. And I believe I overheard her on the phone, and I assumed it was to the man again, and she was saying how upsetting it was for her to see the effect it had on me, and that I couldn't even look at her. And the guidance counselor listened like she'd listened before to me speak about my sexuality. And I left feeling that I left feeling catharsis. I left feeling that I had gotten it all out. That night, there was an argument at home. And I was downstairs. I was trying to hear what was going on, but I couldn't. And then it was over. And my mother came to me, and she was in a rage. She was so upset with me, but she was whispering. And she told me that the guidance counselor had spoken to her father about what had happened. And her father had spoken to my father, who was his good friend. And so he then knew everything. And she blamed me. And I remember I have this image of her towering over me, and me cowering and being small and breaking into tears. And it was so much. It was the guidance counselor's betrayal, my having betrayed my mother, her anger at me, my feeling the blame, their argument, what I had done to their relationship. And a weekend went by before I arrived at school, and went straight for the principal, went straight to her office. And I remember being loud and her trying to calm me down, and I didn't want to be calmed down. She tried to touch my shoulder, and I flung her arm off of me, and I was livid. I wanted to speak to this guidance counselor, but she was no longer there. She had been fired. So there would be no resolution for me. And I remember being so angry at the principal, because she'd hired this woman, encouraged us to speak to her, and then she'd fired her as well. And so now I had no access to her. There was going to be no confrontation. I could not confront her with what she had done. She had gotten away with it, really. That's the feeling I had. I didn't care about anything. I didn't respect authority figures after that. I started to hang out with the bad boys, the ones who didn't respect the teachers. And it was just a difficult time. I was supposed to be getting ready for A-level exams, but at home there were arguments all the time. My father, when he would drop me to school, would ask me questions about the man who was coming to the house. So I was in the middle of their business. I mean, it was not a good time. It was not a good time at all. What I learned from this situation is that you shouldn't trust anybody. You can pretend that you trust them, but don't really trust them. I also learned to expose myself before anyone exposes me, right? Which is probably why I find it so easy just to make these videos and to speak about things that people might want to keep secret. I don't think that there are any secrets. I think that my life is an open book. I think that I'm human, having a human experience, and there's a range within what humans experience, right? So nothing's really very surprising, you know. And I learned as well to, I think, be shameless and to hide my hurt even from myself. I think that I don't have access to a part of me that was really hurt, and this was one of those devastating moments that changed who I was permanently through the damage that it did. And it's interesting because I can't remember a lot that happened around this event. And I'd like to think that if I could go back, right, I wouldn't trust the guidance counselor. But like I said, her whole job is based on trust. So I would probably have trusted her again. If I could go back with the knowledge I have now, I would confront my mother. I would not have accepted the blame for her mistakes. I would have stood up to her and told her that she was wrong and that she should have been the one to open up about this, and that our conversation should have been different. It should not have been about me trying to protect her. It should have been about being an adult and dealing with the consequences of your adult actions and leading by example. And I mean, now I think about things like the legal ramifications of it, because I ended up putting this aside to protect my parents from public scrutiny. But what about statute of limitations and legal ramifications? I believe that in Barbados, this is more of an ethical than a legal issue, and there's probably no recourse for something like this, which is unfortunate. After my mother died and the dust settled, it suddenly came to me that I wanted to speak to this guidance counselor. And so I reached out to my secondary school, and they responded saying that they had passed on my contact information to her. That was over a month ago. I have not heard from her. And so I decided to make a video about it and expose her here. What a horrible person. I wanted to say, what a horrible person you are, Miss Browne. But people aren't one thing. This was a horrible thing that you did. And I would like you to own up to it. I would like you to sit with it, with the damage that you did, and really take a long look at who you were in that moment. I do not know who you went on to be, but you didn't go on to be someone who reached out to me as an adult, because maybe you could say, oh, I was a child then, I was a teenager, but you never reached out to me as an adult to take responsibility for your actions. And that suggests to me that you're a coward. And I think it's interesting because my videos have been about how people take away from the Bible is Sodom and Gomorrah and how homosexuality is villainized, right? But in this situation, for example, what is the scripture that speaks out against what you have done? This horrible thing that you have done, right? And no one would be making the terrible comments that they make on my videos about this thing that you have done, right? So while we villainize the LGBTQ community, there are so many other sins that are socially acceptable, and in this hierarchy of sins aren't as frowned upon. But this thing that you did, it altered me for life. It ruined my relationship with my mother. I believe that her hostility towards me for my entire life has had to do with my betrayal of her trust and her perhaps feeling that it was an attack on her image, an image that she had curated. It was necessary then to use hostility to affect or reinstate her authority. I don't know, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but it's only as an adult that it occurred to me that she never forgave me, and subconsciously the way in which she behaved towards me is a direct manifestation of that. I also consider that knowing what I know as an adult, I don't judge what she did. My father was not a loving husband. He wasn't someone who would spontaneously show his love for her. He wasn't someone who would say, "Oh, honey, I bought this. I saw this and I thought of you." He was someone who had things in his diary, like her birthday and their anniversary, and she would get flowers and a card. And am I excusing betrayal? I think I am in this case. Also, understanding that there were calls to him as well at strange hours in the night when she was traveling from a woman. And so I felt like they were both doing the same thing. I felt like, as with many relationships from that generation, they would rather stay together so that they could celebrate 50 years of being together. Or even although that being together, what was it really? Stuck together by arguments. It was a mess. I do not know why they stayed together. I really don't. They argued constantly every day. So yeah. And this is long after that wound had healed. Although who knows if it had healed, because his inspiration for the men's group, the idea that women are no good, and his preference for male company had a lot to do with that betrayal, I think. But before that, he had abandonment issues with his father, wouldn't invest in a relationship with his children because of these abandonment issues. So all of that though to say that when you go and you paint a picture of yourself as a parent as being perfect, and then your children see the flaws, they feel betrayed, they feel lied to. My reaction may have been different if she just assumed her mistake and helped me understand that parents are humans too, they're not perfect. And it's only after my understanding of that parents are people, that I could forgive my parents for being the horrible parents that they were. And yeah. The people in your life who are there to help you, sometimes they do so, but through really harsh lessons that you learn. And this was one that I won't ever forget.